Summit, day 3, mind you, currently going on at the Kenyatta International Convention Center. We're right here at the capital, Nairobi, the host of that particular summit that has seen various representatives, stakeholders, and nearly 20 heads of African nations converge in the capital, Nairobi, to talk about matters climate change. On day 2 of the summit, we saw major pronouncements by African leaders in terms of positioning Africa and claiming its fair share in terms of not being a major contributor, but we are feeling the adverse effects of climate change. So what needs to be done? We definitely had the clarion call about climate financing, writing off debts as well. So we're just having a discussion on some of the nitty-gritty details that have come out of this particular summit, which is on the 3rd day. Allow me to reintroduce my guests right here in studio. I'm joined by Clive Mutunga, who's the director at USAID-funded Build Project at AFIDEP. Asante sana for your time. Equally joined by Charles Kabiswa, who's the CEO of Regenerate Africa. Thanks for your time. So right before the break, we were talking about the debt relief for African countries, and I think we had just expounded on that. It would be proper to talk about how important Africa is in this journey towards combating climate change. Charles, what exactly is the continent's potential as a global decarbonization, in the global decarbonization agenda? Because I'm looking at what has been pronounced so far, borrowing from John Kerry, who's the US climate envoy. He says, this problem is human-made. It's about pollution, not complicated. It is clear Africa presents the best opportunity to win the battle. Where are the opportunities?
Yeah, the opportunities are immense here in Africa because, first and foremost, we do have the landscape that is strategic for of course, maybe green, whether blue economy or green investment or regeneration. So there are some nature-based investments which can work so well in Africa, even within the arid, semi-arid parts of Africa. So we still have that space that is a potential for including forestry, agroforestry, the abundance of water resources as well. So the agriculture, once we do it right way, transitioning into more of regenerative or agroecology or conservation, maybe some people want to call it climate smart agriculture. So they see that all that potential. We haven't done too bad, and we have not contributed too much to the global pollution like the developed countries. So we still have that space. The transitioning, energy transitioning, 100% pathway to transitioning to renewable energy is a great potential still. So we still have all those low-hanging fruits where there is wise investment. What we are lacking might be more of the capacities and then the finances and probably the technology. So I think that is position us better into the landscape, but also with that in play, we are better placed to walk the path towards the net zero journey and decarbonization.
Okay, interesting. Your view on that, the potential within Africa and how we can actually tap into our potential to get the best possible outcome.
Sure, I think in line with what Charles mentioned, I would also want to mention a huge potential Africa has, and that's the people. If you look at the population, Africa is the only continent which is projected to continue, whose population is projected to continue growing beyond 2100. So right now we have a very youthful age structure in Africa. It's the only continent in the world where over 50% in many cases of the population is young. And this is provides immense potential in what we call in these development circles the demographic dividend. Many of the countries that are developed have already sort of gone through the demographic transition, and the fertility has reduced to maybe replacement value level, which is roughly 2 persons. In Africa, many of the countries continue fertility has declined, but it hasn't declined as much. And using the demographic dividend paradigm, where countries are looking at opening their potential to accelerated economic growth by investments to the young people, to the young growing populations in the continent, it's a sure way to also contribute to the green climate debate. If you look at, if I could just explain that again to a lay person, what the demographic dividend is basically looking at a country's age structure. As more people enter the employment sector, the dependency decreases. So governments have more money to spend on people. So through investments like human capital formation, great education and skills, this opens them to a place where they can really harness the young population to spur great economic growth. So to me, that's a clear opportunity for Africa, but of course there has to be investment in policies to do exactly that, to develop skills, good skills with green jobs for the future, policies looking at providing access to basic health services, including sexual and reproductive health, family planning, to get men and women to have the kids that they can educate, they can feed. So there are great opportunities in that space where African governments can really use the demographic dividend to harness that and put them in the next phase of green growth, which combines that dividend as well.
Okay, thanks for breaking it down as well. You were quite technical at some point there. But Charles, coming back to you, how important is this inaugural Africa Climate Summit? Because we're heading towards COP28 and looking at the unison in the voice within the African continent, that we come out with one voice, one agenda when it comes to combating climate change in terms of harmonized climate initiatives and whatnot. How important is this ahead of the COP28 summit?
Yeah, it is very important, and I also think this is not the first time we are coming up with a harmonized voice, because usually in this climate negotiation you have got an Africa all one voice, because it is one position for Africa. So you have national processes, you have got the negotiators coming with the country national position that is fed into the East African position that now gets into the African bloc. So that's the negotiation part. It hasn't been necessarily involving the political leaders. So the uniqueness now is that now we have got a lot of support from the presidents and from the governments, and we think maybe this has got more weight probably than the previous conversations. And I know it doesn't wipe away the other negotiations that have been going on, but as we are going into the global stocking in the COP28, this is going to be a big position. My brother already talked about some new sectors coming on board that haven't been funded before, like the health sector. You know, health colleagues have been like living in their own, out of the climate space. So they don't want to bother with the jargon involved in it, and they don't want to understand the protocols. But right now we have been participating in a number of sessions where this has been now coming on agenda. And again in the COP, the COP28 is creating space for the health days, including the WHO pavilion on health. So there's going to be new conversations on health, integrating health SRHR into some of these already existing agenda, including loss and damage, the gender mitigation, adaptation. Always find a way so that the health impact on climate is also given some kind of space, including tapping into potential allocation of the climate financing, which hasn't been there before. So it is also a progress that we think is something that is emerging as new. But generally, we are hopeful that now this has got more stronger voice, and let's see the space. But let's not forget that certain excitements have been in there before. We just want to see them realizing into tangible actions to Africa.
Okay, and still with you, speaking of tangible actions, do you think the Nairobi Declaration is a tangible action, that it will be different from perhaps previous declarations and pledges that have been made in terms of putting impetus, perhaps on Africa financing, climate financing? What say you about it?
Yeah, I think there has also been some countries, including some head of states or even technical people in the climate, of course, not so comfortable with some of the text missing, critical few countries that maybe I won't mention now, but there has been some countries not so sure whether it is inclusive enough. But overall, I would say it is a good start. It is a good start. How that translates into reality is now what we are waiting to see.
Well, from a policy point of view, how does that translate into reality? What do you make of the Nairobi Declaration, and how can we best get value from such a declaration as we head into the COP28?
I think the Nairobi Declaration gives us a great impetus as a region. Number one, it sort of harmonizes the voice from the various leaders in Africa to put climate change and African leadership at the center of climate change action, and to inform the deliberations at the COP28 in Dubai later in the year. The biggest challenge, again, and we'll talk about this maybe until cows come home, is how do you move those declarations at the conference of the parties to national policies, to national and sub-national programs and projects that actually impact the lives and livelihoods of people. Like you did mention at the beginning of the session, we've seen commitment, accord, decision after the other. And to the extent these global commitments or declarations have the impetus to actually get us there. For example, I'll give a good example. The first time we are seeing a lot of tension on health, and African ministers of health. We recently had a meeting in Lilongwe, Malawi, a couple of weeks ago, where health ministers and environment ministers from across Africa came to come up with a common African position on why it's critical to put health at the center of climate action in Africa. How that gets, that attention will be there, of course, because they all signed to the Lilongwe Declaration, which is expected to feed into the Nairobi Declaration and to the Dubai Declaration. But at the end of the day, you ask ourselves, how do these now translate into politics? Because they have to cascade back. They have to be implemented through national policies, like national strategies. They have to be designed to either through the various ministries or the other non-state actors to implement activities on the ground. I know that is a popular session here at Tamia in Kenya. You have to see things on the ground, vitu kwa ground. So how do these translate into activities that empower women, empower young people across Kenya and Africa to really put them in the forefront of development and combat climate action? Okay,
well noted. Charles, I don't know if you know about this, but on the sidelines of the Africa Climate Summit, we have one that's called, they dubbed it the Real Climate Summit. And these are dissenting voices that are not too happy about the agenda. They say perhaps the Western agenda has taken over, that perhaps African voices have been put at the back. How do we ensure that this is an all-inclusive conversation, because it affects each and every one of us? I'm sure they're usually dissenting voices, not just in this time, but in previous COP 27 and 26, we've seen those up in arms saying, you know, perhaps the fuel guzzlers that are being packed there, apart from the president, host president, who's been using an electric car, that we are talking too much, we aren't really putting it into work. So how do we bring all these voices, perhaps the dissenting voices, onto the table so we move on forward in earnest? Is it possible?
Yeah, I want to agree with some of those voices, because the longer term inaction that has been demonstrated in Africa, of course, including the commitments their colleagues are making from the global north, is not felt, because even beside the declaration and also the summit and the COP, there are critical national processes which actually are very fundamental, probably, that translate into real actions. For instance, all countries, Kenya, East African countries, globally, they have developed what they call the national determined contributions, and these are not implemented, with again commitments put in there, including budget, our own contribution as nations, and maybe the grants we expect from outside. We have got processes like the national adaptation plans, or adaptation plans. Those are adaptation priorities to support communities and landscapes become climate resilient. Some budget allocation is not there, and actually these ones do not have an external influence like per se. These are national processes, including the policies and the climate change policies or frameworks. So there's already some kind of a base ground where we would feel the impact of response even from the national governments. So the question why it is being brought, that probably this is also, some of them might be political, either political related. You know, climate is not politically driven. So we need to see the real actions, but also in the national processes. For instance, the examples I'm giving out, these are all done by all countries, including East African countries. And we don't see money. We don't see money being budgeted. We don't see money, even the little money that comes in, it is not actually felt on the ground because of the governance-related challenges. And actually the big money again that has been coming in, again, is for big companies, for either private sector or for huge farming companies that do not trickle down to the rural people. I think this is still a big concern, that we don't turn this into more of a political climate agenda, but just make sure that the dollars, the shilling, are allocated to the monies and it reaches to the people that need the money, who are more vulnerable or who are at risk in this climate crisis era.
Okay, we definitely need value addition, money going to the intended people. Allow us to shift focus just briefly to KICC, where I understand our reporter and my colleague Purity Museo-Nzuki is joining us via way of phone for an update on the third day of the Africa Climate Summit. Purity, good morning. I hope you can hear me clearly. It's been a busy 2 days, a beehive of activities at the KICC. What should Kenyans and Africa expect from the third day? And perhaps tell us a little bit about the Nairobi Declaration that is set to be released today and what is its intended purpose.
Right. Good morning to you, Jesse. Right now, I'm currently at the main hall, the Savo, a hall where all these declarations and commitments have been made since day one of this African Climate Summit. And so what is happening today, if I can begin from there, is now the declaration as it's said, and also commitments. Remember, we've had intense conversations from different delegates across the continent. But the message has been that part of climate justice is on financing, and that has been the biggest challenge. So even for the envoy and the delegates that we had yesterday, they were saying that yes, Africa has 60% green energy transition potential, but massive investment is required. So today, what is happening is that now from all the conversations, we are eager just to know how much, for example, is going to be invested, not just from what the industrialist nations are to pay through the loss and damage, but as a continent, because when President William Ruto yesterday was speaking, for instance, he was urging governments to ensure that they do not set.
Okay, unfortunately, we couldn't get Purity Museo-Nzuki quite clearly, but we definitely have our reporter stationed at KICC. We'll be linking up with her in just but a few once we sort out the monkeys that are hanging on the lines right there. But away from KICC, back to the conversation right here in studio. Clive, a lot has been said about Africa and its potential, about how we need to position ourselves due to the adverse effects of climate change that we're experiencing right here in the continent. It's a good step that the African leaders are positioning themselves not just as, perhaps stakeholders, but equally as major contributors to this whole discourse around climate change. As we head to COP28, and we've been told here by Steve about the unfortunate all talk but no action. How do we change this narrative so we actually feel, as Steve says, those farmers who are planting trees qua ground, as you mentioned, they actually feel the effects of this conversations that are going on the global stages, so we actually have a trickle-down effect? How does this happen? How do we get to that position?
I think it gets to the point where we really have to move the rhetoric into action, and it's possible because by getting the attention to the highest level of policy attention, why we need, maybe just to back up and say why I understand we need sort of that Africa and global attention is to actually make sure that this trickles down to national policies and plans. So I think we have a good opportunity to do this. The fact that we are talking about Africa leadership, we are talking about, for the first time, a Southern-led conference of the parties where we can demonstrate to the world as a continent that time has come for us to do that. But we shouldn't just do that by not demonstrating the leadership into getting policies and plans that get us there. I'll still go again to a sector that I've worked quite a long time in, is the health sector. We are talking about integrating health into climate action and using the COP process to facilitate that. But if you look at many countries in Africa, their health policies do not integrate climate change. So it's sort of foolhardy to imagine that you will be able to reap these benefits that have been sort of given that prominence at the global level by not having the policies in place, and not even in place, ensuring these policies are implemented. We know how to implement policies, but more often than not, we don't. So why would it be a challenge for the Minister of Health in Uganda or Tanzania or Kenya to really come up with very robust programs at the national level, at the sub-national levels? We know also development as decentralized in many places. For example, the county government. Why can't we get county structures? We've seen a lot of leadership from the Council of Governors here in Kenya. A very big initiative was launched yesterday where counties actually tap in directly into climate finance. So I think there's a great and real opportunity to sort of turn the dial and move from rhetoric to action and get programs where, for instance, counties are competing now in Kenya to access climate finance. I think that peer-to-peer accountability will also be critical, using structures like the Council of Governors to hold the county implementers into account. So I think good processes coming up. I think we need to do more of this and better to ensure that whatever goes to Dubai comes back to Kilifi, to Mandera, to Karamoja, to many other places in Africa.
Okay. It's all about creating climate resilient health systems on one side, but also integrating the county governments to make sure that it goes down qua ground, as we usually say. I understand the lines are sorted. Our reporter Purity Museo-Nzuki is back with us. Purity, sorry I had to cut you short. Apologies for that. Kindly illustrate about the day 3 of the Africa Climate Summit.
Good morning to you, Jesse. I hope you can now hear me. we've been experiencing massive network breakdown, but we move on regardless. So today the biggest conversation is on the Nairobi Declaration, and we are excited. Personally, I am excited, and I can say I'm literally shaking about this. I know we've had so many declarations, especially on climate change, Abuja Declaration, Paris Agreement, but remember, this is the first declaration, Nairobi Declaration, where it only involves the African continent, the African nations. They have come together from day one. The delegates were in agreement that Africa, yes, we have a problem, and the problem is the financing problem. And the biggest problem, they said, is that there is some 100 billion shillings donor, not really donor shilling, but that which was committed on the loss and damage fund, which is yet to be released. And yesterday, the EU Commission did confirm that yes, this money is yet to be released, and it's supposed to this compensation was to be made by the industrialized nations who are responsible for the largest percentage of the carbon emissions, and therefore saying that the fact that Africa is suffering from the consequences of actions of other people, then that is how the fund was arrived at. But that is yet to be honored. Now, on day one, just if you can remember, President William Ruto said that it was not time to have a conversation regarding or a debate regarding North versus the South, but that has been the conversation even last year during COP27. We saw that Africa had gone to Egypt with an agenda that we need to push for this fund to be released. But the head of state now changed the narrative and said, okay, fine, as we wait for them to release that fund, what can we do as Africa? How do we tap into the opportunities that we have? So this week it has been a conversation of Africa as a solution, a central solution, and not as a victim of the climate change. And yesterday they also spoke and said we are going to have conversations on how now we can ensure that there's massive investment in countries affected on the continent and make use of what we have. It has also been confirmed that, for instance, Africa has at least 60% of energy potential. And so if this, for example, is utilized well, you can imagine it's not going to power only Africa as a continent, but also it's going to be an export to the other developed world, rather. And so today, it's a commitment on financing what Africa as a continent, what countries are going to commit. And yesterday, countries were again challenged that, you know what, you need now not to sideline the climate action. So when you're doing your budgeting, for instance, you need to ensure that, for example, climate change takes the biggest chunk of the allocations. So we are interested in also getting to see if there's an agreement on, for example, at least what percentage should countries be allocating to climate action in their budget. And it's very much achievable, because when you look at the WHO guidelines on health, at least 15% of the budget allocation is supposed to go on health. But there's no such an agreement as far as climate action is concerned. Again, Nairobi Declaration, Jesse, is very important as we head to COP28 in November. And yesterday, even when Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, was speaking, said that this conference is summit is very important, because this time round, Africa is going to head to the UN conference with one common agenda and with one common goal, and as a united continent. So it's going to be to determine how COP28, for instance, is going to be and what agenda, because it's a loud voice from Africa that, you know what, enough of being seen as victims, enough of being victimized for actions of other nations, and we need now to take advantage of what is going on and what we have, and the resources that we have as a continent, and even export to other nations. So that is what we're expecting today. Indeed, Nairobi Declaration is a big conversation today. It's the first one for the African nations, and we saw a lot of commitment yesterday when so many heads of state and government were right here in Nairobi, and that was just to show that whatever that is going to be declared today, they are in agreement with it. So yes, we are in Savo. The event is actually already started, and once the official speeches begin, then we shall hand it over officially to server room. But for now, Jesse, it's back to you in the studio.
Well, thanks for that detailed report, Purity Museo Nzuki, my colleague who's at KICC, following keenly on the developments around the Africa Climate Summit, Day 3 today. And as she has explained, we expect that Nairobi declaration to be pronounced later on in the course of the day. So, gentlemen, time really does fly. It's already 10, and I understand the deliberations at the main auditorium of the KICC hall are just beginning. So I'd like your final comments. We've definitely talked extensively about matters to do with climate change from the policy point of view to implementation, what needs to be done, what we should focus on keenly even as we head into the COP28 later on in November. Final comments, and I'll start with you, Clive. All things said and done, what say you about?
Thank you. Thanks for having us again. And my final comments is that Africa can and should lead in climate action. Health is the face of climate change, and that health should be a priority in the global, regional, national, and subnational discourses and action on climate change.
Well, thank you for that. Charles?
Yeah, thank you, Roger, for hosting us. And I would want to say that, of course, there is now kind of a political momentum and a will with the declaration that has united voice. So let's keep pushing that. And again, let's also not forget that there are also funding mechanisms which have been in, like the Green Climate Financing and the Adaptation Fund, GEF. So we just need to move away in our comfort zone of a silo mentality and try to intersect or intersectionality with other sectors like health that have been neglected for so long, and also try to become more accountable, because there's some money already coming in the countries, but I think implementation has been a bit of a challenge, and then trickling down to the local people. So as we move to the global stock take in COP28, we need to have this united and coordinated effort to bring the dollars, $1 million or $1 billion in Africa.
And we need to ensure that they are used for the intended purposes. Exactly. Accountability. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. And kindly, as you proceed to your countries, make sure you convey our greetings right here from Kenya. We were joined by Charles Kabiswa, who's the CEO of Regenerate Africa. Asante sana for your time and your input right here. And equally, Clive Mutunga, who's the director